Thank you for joining us for our 11th Gretchen Amphlett Memorial Research Lecture. Given current restrictions, we're delighted to be able to bring you this lecture virtually for the first time. I'm Gary Shaughnessy, for those who don't know me, and I'm Chair of Trustees at Parkinson's UK. And on behalf of everyone at the charity, it's our huge pleasure and privilege to be hosting you this evening. I'd particularly like to thank John Amphlett for so generously sponsoring tonight's event in memory of his wife Gretchen. Gretchen was a long-time member of our Cambridge branch and lifelong teacher. She was passionate about public education, and this lecture series is an especially fitting way to remember her and her life's work. Thank you, John. We're also very pleased to welcome so many of you from our local groups across the country. Thank you all for joining us. Tonight, you'll hear about one of the most exciting developments in Parkinson's research, looking at the impact that cannabidiol has on Parkinson's psychosis. You might have heard of the terms CBD or cannabis oil, and they both refer to cannabidiol. Parkinson's UK is partnering with King's College London and is investing £1.2 million in the world's first large-scale trial looking at the potential benefits and safety of cannabidiol to alleviate the symptoms of Parkinson's-related psychosis. 50 to 60% of people with Parkinson's will develop this distressing symptom, which is characterized by hallucinations and delusions. This 3.5-year study is being fully funded through our virtual biotech program, in the hope that it could lead to a potentially life-changing new treatment for people with Parkinson's, as well as for their families. Parkinson's UK created our virtual biotech program in 2017. It's there to accelerate breakthroughs in Parkinson's research and find better treatments and a cure in years, not decades, something I know all of us here will be passionate about. People with Parkinson's are at the heart of everything the charity does, including setting our research agenda so we remain focused on what matters most to the community and what would make the biggest differences to their lives. You'll hear more about virtual biotech, what it does, how it works, why it's different, and the cutting-edge science it's supporting tonight. As Chair of Trustees, I'm extremely proud that Parkinson's UK is being bold, providing leadership and really driving forward the development of new, better therapies that could change life for people with Parkinson's. People like many of you and people like me. I'm delighted to introduce Professor Sagnik Bhattacharya and Dr. Latha Valajuan from King's College London, who will give us an in-depth look into the cannabidiol trial and the huge potential it holds for people living with Parkinson's psychosis.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for the invite and for the kind introduction. It is a real pleasure to be here today and to talk about our study of cannabidiol in Parkinson's psychosis. I and my colleague and co-investigator Dr. Velayudan will take turns in talking about the study. So why Parkinson's psychosis? As you all know, there are many different symptoms of Parkinson's, and not everyone will experience the same symptoms. About 50 to 60% of people with Parkinson's will develop psychotic symptoms as the disease progresses. So these can be extremely distressing to patients themselves, as well as to their families. They can lead to loss of independence, faster loss of memory, and even death. Therefore, they clearly need to be treated. So what are these symptoms? Usually, they start with minor illusions, such as mistaking a branch of a tree for a cat, or feeling a sense of presence. As Parkinson's progresses, they may evolve into more well-formed hallucinations, such as seeing people or animals that are not there. Or they may be strange beliefs or delusions, such as thinking that someone is out to hurt or harm them, or that their spouse is being unfaithful. As these symptoms progress, it may be difficult to separate them from reality. So what are the current treatment options? Usually at the early stages, one may respond to the adjustment of dose of their dopamine replacement treatment, to reassurance, or other simple strategies. But by the later stages, one typically does not respond to these strategies. And that's when they need treatment with antipsychotic medications such as quetiapine, clozapine, and other treatments. However, current treatments either do not work well or they are not tolerated very well. Therefore, there is a clear unmet clinical need for effective and well-tolerated novel treatments. Of course, the next question is why cannabidiol for Parkinson's psychosis? Cannabidiol, as many of you will know, is a non-intoxicating substance present in the extract of the cannabis plant. But before we go more into that, it is interesting to note that even in the UK, the medicinal use of cannabis is not something new. From the early description by the Irish physician O'Shaughnessy in the 19th century, it has been there in the British pharmacopoeia until about half a century ago when it left British pharmacopoeia. However, cannabis is not one substance. The extract of the cannabis plant has over 140 different cannabinoids. The main ones of interest to us are delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, as you can see in the cartoon on the left, or simply called as THC. The other one is cannabidiol, also known as CBD. From here on, we will refer to them just as THC or CBD. To put simply, THC may be the bad bit of cannabis. It can cause psychosis. While CBD, on the other hand, does not cause psychosis and is very likely the good bit of cannabis. So the next question is, might CBD work? Over the past decade or so, we have carried out a lot of work that suggests that the effects of CBD on brain function, as we have shown here, are opposite to those of THC, and that it can block some of the acute psychosis caused by THC in healthy people. Because THC can cause psychosis, this may suggest that CBD may work as an antipsychotic. Further, we have shown that it can ameliorate some of the brain abnormalities present in people at risk of developing psychosis, as well as those in people with established psychosis. And further to that, we also know that there have been a couple of clinical trials, small trials in people with established psychosis, which have shown that CBD can work as an antipsychotic. However, what we do not know at this stage is whether it will work in people with Parkinson's psychosis, as all these studies were in young people with psychosis. So the next key question is, will it be safe and tolerated well in older people who typically present with Parkinson's psychosis? We reviewed the literature that is out there and found that it is generally very well tolerated by older people based on evidence from a number of clinical trials in many conditions. However, the key important point to note is that it should be pure CBD and there should not be any THC present in the system. However, what we don't know as yet is, will CBD be safe and tolerated well in Parkinson's psychosis patients who will also be on a whole host of other medications? What is a safe CBD dose to use in Parkinson's psychosis patients? Might it interact with other treatments that people will be on? Finally, how might it actually work in Parkinson's psychosis? Therefore, here we are with the world's first clinical trial very kindly supported by Parkinson's UK through their virtual biotech to address all of these questions. Thank you very much for your attention. I will pause there now and let my colleague and co-investigator, Dr. Velayudan, to describe the study in greater detail. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So here we are with the first trial with cannabidiol for Parkinson's psychosis. Who are we going to study? As the red oval line outlines here, we are going to focus on people with distressing psychotic symptoms who are not responding to medications that are available or are unable to tolerate these interventions. Who can take part? People who are aged 40 or older, experiencing symptoms of psychosis such as delusions and or any form of hallucinations which has developed after the onset of Parkinson's. And we'll refer to this PDP henceforth. They will be on stable doses of medications, that is anti-Parkinson's, and also that for psychosis, which are usually quetiapine and risperidone, but not on clozapine. They will not need to stop their medications to take part in this study. It's important they have a reliable informant or a caregiver. The trial medication is pure CBD in capsule form, which will be taken once a day at mealtime. It will be of pure pharmaceutical grade and at a dose that will work. We are often asked, how is it different to high street or the online CBD preparations? The high street preparations have negligible CBD and one need to take a lot of it. They are not of medicine's grade and may have potential impurities. Briefly about the trial design and timelines. It has two parts. In the first part, we are trying to find the right dose. All participants will receive CBD in this part. We will test increasing doses starting from 200 mg per day to 1000 mg per day, having 3 sets of participants at each dose level. This will help us to find the best dose. And once we find the best dose, we'll start the part 2 of the study. Here, we'll recruit 120 participants with PDP. Half of them will receive CBD and the other half placebo. They'll have 12 weeks of treatment. And we'll compare people with and without CBD. A small group of participants from this part of the study, that is the second part, will be invited to take part in MRI study, which will help us to understand how CBD works. For this study, we'll have 4 groups. People with PDP taking CBD and people with PDP who are not taking CBD will be invited from the part 2 of the study. They will have MRI scans twice, once before they start treatment and once after they finish. We'll also have 2 groups of controls, people with Parkinson's who have no psychosis and people with no Parkinson's. What will happen? We will screen participants who have expressed interest to take part. There'll be study-related physical examinations, blood tests will be done, and assessments of motor and non-motor symptoms will be done. These will be repeated at regular intervals with weekly phone call for checking their well-being. There will be 4 visits for the part 1 study and 5 visits for part 2 study. These will take about 1 to 2 hours for participants and similar time for the caregiver. We will reimburse reasonable travel costs, and provide refreshments. In light of the pandemic, we have made changes to make it safer for people to take part in the study. We'll carry out assessments remotely where this is feasible. We'll also conduct home visits if this is preferred and practical. Personal protective equipments will be used by the researchers as required for the face-to-face activities. With the help from Research Intervention Team, Parkinson's UK, we carried out a survey during the first lockdown. Generally, most said that it is important to carry on research, as you can see verbatim here. And with the recommendations, we were able to make changes to the protocol as well. What are the key outcome measures? The study will help us to identify the right CBD dose that is safe and tolerable. It will also help us to find out if CBD reduces psychotic symptoms and if it reduces other non-motor symptoms and motor symptoms. Study sites. We marked the key areas that have already expressed to take part in the study. As you see on the map, it's spread across England so that participants from different parts of the country can take part in the study. What is our vision in 5 to 10 years' time? If the study results are positive, we will conduct larger efficacy studies, which would help with licensing and making it available on the NHS for this indication. A huge thanks to Parkinson's UK for funding this study. And also thanks to the CAN PDP team for coming together. Apart from Sagnik and myself, we have Professor Ray Chaudhry, who's neurology professor from King's College London. Professor Dag Arslan and Professor Clive Ballard are renowned trialists and experts in neuropsychiatric symptoms. Professor Dominic Fitch is an expert in visual hallucinations. Success of a trial largely depends on volunteers and participants. So we are keenly looking forward for you participants and people with PDP who would like to take part in the study. Please contact us at the trial office. Also, get in touch for the research opportunities via Parkinson's UK Research Support Network. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful evening and rest of the meeting. Thank you again.
Thank you both. This groundbreaking trial is just one of several potential new treatments being explored through the Parkinson's Virtual Biotech, the charity's drug development program. That was an extremely clear explanation of the trial and how it works. I'm delighted, though, now to introduce Arthur Roach, Director of Research at Parkinson's UK, who will explain the Virtual Biotech program in more detail and why we believe this unique approach holds such promise.
Thanks, Gary, and hello, everyone. I have 15 minutes to tell you about our virtual biotech program and explain to you why we've chosen the cannabidiol project you just heard about to be an important part of that program. So in a single sentence, a long sentence perhaps, what is our virtual biotech program? So it's Parkinson's UK's program through which we aim to create new medicines, new treatments for Parkinson's by adopting and adapting the methods of the biotech sector, but doing this always in the interest of the Parkinson's community. So why have we decided to work in this way? Why not other ways? Let me give you some of the rationale for that. We talk to people with Parkinson's all the time, and we get very clear messages. There are many things people want from research, but the thing that's wanted most urgently, most desperately is new treatments. new treatments that will stop Parkinson's, perhaps even reverse aspects of Parkinson's, new treatments that will deal with the very important unmet need symptoms like psychosis or falls or sleep or constipation, any of these things, as well as stopping and slowing progression. So where will those new treatments come from and how can we help create them? So here you see 4 stages in creation of a new treatment. It starts with scientific discoveries that are usually made in universities, and a lot of that work is funded by grants from Parkinson's UK. This is work on the genes, on the cells, on the biochemical pathways that are somehow going wrong in Parkinson's. And it points to new therapeutic hypotheses, new ideas. Perhaps a drug that worked in this way could stop Parkinson's or address that symptom. Once those insights are developed through research, through basic research, they have to be turned into candidate drug molecules. That's a second box, developing treatments. This is often work that involves chemistry or protein engineering, where we try to find the specific chemical structure or the specific protein that can be put in the pill or injected as the treatment for Parkinson's. Those drugs or those molecules, once we've identified them, have to be tested, of course, in clinical trials. Those clinical trials can be earlier stage or later stage. Certainly the later stage trials can be large and expensive, hundreds of participants, tens or hundreds of millions of pounds. Those large studies, in most cases, are conducted by pharmaceutical companies. Then the final stage is the approval of treatment. So when there's a successful clinical trial, then the regulatory agencies, in the case of the United Kingdom, that's the MHRA, have to review carefully all the efficacy data, review the safety data, and make a determination that this drug should be used for this indication. That gives permission for the company to manufacture and sell the drug, for the NHS to use it, and for doctors to prescribe it, and then it gives patients a choice, do I want that treatment or not? All these stages have to work together to create new treatments. There can't be any gaps along the way. We believe the pieces are all there, they do work. However, there is a gap, there's an inefficiency, and that is at the stage of developing treatments. So this is an area that I've worked in for many years in university and in industry. Many of the players that used to fund that work, used to do that work, have now pulled back from it, especially in diseases like Parkinson's. Why is that? It's because it's considered to be more difficult and higher risk. It's not scientifically interesting enough for the universities often, and it's considered early and high risk for the companies and investors. So there's a gap there. Yes, some projects do move through that gap, but not all of them. There are many that are stuck there. So our virtual biotech program is designed to address this gap. It's designed to step in there and say, okay, we're a charity, but we can work here if we have the right people, the right thinking and resources. And we currently dedicate about £4 million a year to this stage of work, and it could certainly be larger, but we're at 4 million. We think we can make a real difference. We can work in that space. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we do that. So next stage shows that here we have a portfolio of projects. This is the Parkinson's UK Virtual Biotech portfolio. These are all projects that are your projects that were created by Parkinson's UK, along with external partners like Latha and Sagnick you heard about from on the cannabidiol project. So in each case, there's a project team that has a good idea, has a scientist, has expertise, and needs funding to carry it forward. Each one of these projects has a chance to succeed, but it also has a chance of not succeeding. That's the way research is. We can't pick the one that's going to work and fund only that project. If it was that simple, we would have done it a long time ago. So if each individual project has a chance to not make it all the way, how can we ensure there are going to be new treatments? It's by funding a whole range of projects, carefully chosen, carefully managed, where we make hard decisions about prioritizing one project over another. But if we do that well, we do that successfully, and we can get a portfolio of enough projects, and we think the number is somewhere between 15 and 25, then we can be sure that 1, 2, or 3 of these actually will become new treatments addressing important unmet needs. So that's the fundamentals of our virtual biotech strategy, to work like a biotech funder, find the projects in these stages, and give them what they need to succeed. We know we can only fund them up to, at best, the phase 3 stage. At that stage, they have to be solid, attractive projects that other investors or pharma companies will pick up. And they will then pay for the next trial, but we will have made it possible and we will have guided them along the way. To do this, we have a small internal team of people who worked in the biotech and pharma sectors. They know how to make drugs. They know what a good project looks like. They know how to manage a good project. We also have people on the research side and clinical side, and we look carefully at these projects. We not only evaluate them and fund them, but we put scientific and project management insight into the projects. And also, very importantly, we bring the insight of people with Parkinson's. What are the unmet needs? What do we really need in a trial? How can a trial be designed that will work for people with Parkinson's? That input goes into the projects as well. So it's not just funding, it's expertise and help where we can. Some of these projects are clinical stage, the dark blue ones. The light blue ones are preclinical. You can see we built them up over a number of years. And we plan to continue doing that through the rest of this year and beyond. We have a really exciting range of new projects under evaluation. And later this year, if you're plugged into Parkinson's UK, you'll hear about new decisions to fund new projects that promise to address new aspects of Parkinson's. Up to now, we've invested over 10 million in this project portfolio. Now we plan to continue going forward at about, as I said, £4 million a year, and hopefully even more into the future. This slide just points out that in order to create the best projects, the best new treatments, it's actually a global undertaking. The biotech industry, the pharma industry is global, the research industry is global, and we will look everywhere for the best projects. In reality, because we're based in the UK, most of our projects are based in the UK, most of our investigators are based in the UK, like Sagnik and Latha, but we will go elsewhere if there's a particular research team in Australia or the United States or a laboratory in China that we think can do the work best and perhaps most efficiently, then we will go there and use those. And this just shows some of the partners we've either worked with or evaluated working with over the last couple of years. That's an important path to success. We don't just limit ourselves to one geographical area or one type of project. We look for the best ones, guided by the input from the Parkinson's community. What kind of new treatments are needed? That's what we're looking for, and we'll take them wherever we can find them. So in addition to the cannabidiol project that you heard about in detail, I can tell you a bit about these four as examples. So NLX-112, Neurolixis, is a small molecule that originally was tested for another use for neuropathic pain, in fact. And the pharmacology of this molecule was noticed to be one that could be very suitable for treating dyskinesia in Parkinson's. And moreover, it seems to have a number of advantages over other molecules of this class that could be used for testing. So the Neurolixis company decided to try to get funding to develop it for Parkinson's dyskinesia. We funded them in the past for an early preclinical stage of work. We then set them off to look for funding for their clinical trial. They came back and said, Michael J. Fox Foundation really likes the project and is willing to pay 50% of it if we can find the other half somewhere. This is quite common. Often investors like to find someone else who goes in with them, perhaps share the risk, perhaps have someone to commiserate with if it doesn't work. So we said, great, we like partnering with people. We like working with Michael J. Fox Foundation. Let's do this as a joint project. So now it's funded. We're each paying 50%. The company is doing this. The clinical trial is actually happening not in the UK, it's happening in Sweden. Why? Because that's a place where we thought the most efficient project could be run. A small group of clinics who have expertise running exactly this kind of trial with exactly this kind of drug. We thought that's a way to get the best results at the most efficient cost. So that's ongoing now. Next one on Dancitron. This is a small molecule that's used to treat nausea in chemotherapy cases. It's felt to be quite safe. And there is a little bit of clinical evidence from small studies a while ago indicating it may reduce hallucinations in Parkinson's. Because it's ready and available to be tested, a group at UCL, University College London, came to us with a very interesting project to do a high quality, double-blind, placebo-controlled scientific study to see whether that effect on hallucinations is real, to see how strong it is, to see in which Parkinson's patients it's most effective. We discussed with the MHRA exactly what kind of trial could allow them to approve the drug. And now that trial is underway. This is a great example of us thinking that we don't just want to fund a piece of research, we want to fund a program that has a chance to go all the way to be a drug that's in use in the clinic. I'll mention now that we've given ourselves a stretch goal. If anyone bothers to read our websites, you'll see we've given ourselves a stretch goal of creating one new treatment through the virtual biotech program that's in use treating patients in the UK by the end of 2024. And that's a stretch goal, and COVID has stopped or paused most clinical trials that aren't COVID related in the UK for at least a year. So I think that 2024 goal may have to be adjusted, but the principle is there. We're not trying to fund just research projects. We're trying to fund projects which have a chance to go all the way to helping patients living in the UK with Parkinson's. And this is probably the leading candidate for getting there by 2024. There are other clinical stage projects we have now, and there are others we're looking at, we're considering starting in this year or next year, but also have a chance. So we think those are all candidates to bring important new treatments to Parkinson's in years, not decades. GDNF is a project you may have heard about. This very difficult trial, the drug is delivered with a surgical implantation of catheters in the brain. There was a trial funded partly by Parkinson's UK a few years ago. You may have seen the results. You may have seen the BBC documentary about that trial. Very intriguing study, very difficult study for the participants. In the end, what did it show? It showed we really know how now to solve this problem of getting GDNF into the right areas of the brain. And when it gets there, it does have its action on the nerve cells, and there was brain imaging that showed regrowth of the dopamine fibers, exactly what we wanted to occur. The main scientific outcome from the study, though, was not sufficiently positive to be considered a clear win and to allow anyone to manufacture, sell, and use GDNF to treat patients. It's not quite clear enough yet that the efficacy and the safety actually add up for patients. But we believe there's more work to be done here. So we've stepped forward. We think maybe this is a good role for Parkinson's UK. We have a special attachment to this project. We know the people who were in the last trial. We said, all right, we'll take the chance. We will take over the project. We've set up a company called Vivify Biotech that will acquire the project completely. We will be able to give it a fresh start. We'll be able to look at perhaps new ways of developing GDNF. If we can find the answer, if we can crack the puzzle, I guess, we will then have to seek co-funders, because this will be an expensive trial, that also believe in the project and can help us put in place a new trial of GDNF. So that's, watch this space. We hope that in less than a year, we'll be at a point where we'll know whether a next trial can occur or not. The last one on this slide, Sheffield, is an interesting example. Here, some of the work we funded at the universities and the basic research, the very first step, actually led to some very interesting results that we thought had the potential to point to a new treatment. After some pilot studies, we agreed, and we've now agreed to commit to £1.2 million for a project where the science coming out of that Sheffield University grant is now going to go into drug discovery work to try to discover a totally new class of small molecule drug for Parkinson's that will be aimed to stop the disease at its earliest stages. So that's an example of how our early research projects can feed into the virtual biotech in a nice, seamless way. This slide is to make a very important point. I've mentioned several times throughout that we do this for the Parkinson's community. We do this with the Parkinson's community. The main mechanism, the main interface between our research program and people with Parkinson's in the UK is called the Research Support Network. So if you go parkinsons.org.uk/RSN on your browser, you'll come to the Research Support Network part of Parkinson's UK. This is, you can sign up. It simply means you will get lots of information that will tell you about what research is happening, either work that we've funded or other people have funded that's exciting and interesting to people with Parkinson's. It will tell you about opportunities to get involved in studies. So we have people with Parkinson's on grants panels helping us prioritize what areas of research we fund. When we do a clinical trial, there's people with Parkinson's who come and work with the investigators to help design the study and make sure it works for people with Parkinson's, as well as addressing the most important aspects of Parkinson's. So that kind of input went into the cannabidiol study you heard about, as well as all the clinical trials we fund. Also, if people want to get involved in research by being participants in a study, whether it's an online study, a questionnaire, or whether it's going to a clinic and trying an experimental treatment like GDNF or like cannabidiol, this is where you get that information. Take Part Hub, search for that on the Parkinson's UK site. There you can enter your postcode and get told about research studies that are in your area. You don't have to have Parkinson's. People can support Parkinson's research with Parkinson's or without. We need people both types for some of our studies. I am anyone can join. I'm a participant in some of these studies, and if you want to support research in that way, go to the RSN site, go to Take Part Hub, and look for opportunities. But if you want to also find out about how to be on a grants panel, how to be in a group that's advising a clinical study, that's also the place to go. So please have a look at that. Remember, our research program is different because it is guided by the Parkinson's community. We think that makes it more relevant, and that's what people want. So that's the end of my remarks. I think you see now why a study like the cannabidiol study of Sagnick and Latha fits so well in our strategy, why it's part of our effort to create a whole pipeline that will lead to not just one, but we hope, but multiple successes. Thank you very much. I'll now turn it back to Gary to introduce Francis. Thanks.
Thank you, Arthur. I'm now very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Francis Kay. Francis' late husband, Mark, had Parkinson's with psychosis. She was his sole carer for 12 years. Francis is here to share her story, the impact it had on their lives, and the reality of living with Parkinson's. Welcome, Francis.
Thank you, Gary. My husband, Mark, had Parkinson's-related psychosis, and I'm privileged to be sharing my story tonight because I want to help other people who are going through the same situation that my family was. When Mark was first diagnosed, it seemed like his medication dose was possibly wrong and needed adjustment because he had very vivid and sometimes violent nightmares. As his condition developed, he started to experience symptoms that affected every one of his senses. He saw things that weren't there: barbed wire, broken glass on the floor. He had a lot of invisible friends, including a family of meerkats who lived in our airing cupboard. He heard voices and music and phantom sounds. He told me one day he didn't like Dolly Parton singing so loudly in our kitchen. Well, he'd never been a fan of country and Western music. He became very sensitive to the touch. And at one point, he had an imaginary cat who jumped on his bed at night and slept on his feet. And then it woke him up when its tail stroked across his face. His sense of smell was also affected. He smelt cigarettes and burning in the flat. And he complained that his food didn't taste right. He said that it was either sour or it had gone off, or that I'd made him a cup of tea with rusty water. Eventually, Mark lost all sense of time and reality. I can remember one morning him waking me up and telling me that he had an angel sitting at the foot of his bed, and was he dead? I had to explain that in actual fact, it was me sitting at the end of the bed, and that if he thought I was a member of the celestial host, to think that in fact I hadn't ever had any lessons in how to play the harp. All this made caring for him quite challenging, as many of you will understand. But of course there were periods of comedy, and so we laughed as much as we could together, because that was a lot better than weeping. Thanks to the support of family and friends, some of whom were going through similar situations, my family and I were able to cope. However, I don't think we would have done nearly so well without Parkinson's UK. The local support group had many pieces of information and events that I could dip in and out of, and the local coordinator was very helpful. We also had a Parkinson's nurse who had a wealth of knowledge which she shared with me. But in fact, it was the UK Parkinson's helpline that I relied on most. I couldn't have done without their support, their advice, their expertise, their compassion and their patience. They were always there at the end of a phone to offer me support. I'd urge anyone who's going through something like this to get in touch with Parkinson's UK and use their resources. A better treatment for Parkinson's psychosis would, of course, have transformed both Mark's life and mine and our 4 children. It would have reduced the high stress levels that we suffered. But I hope that by sharing my story, it puts into perspective the urgent need for better treatments, life-changing research that Parkinson's UK is accelerating, and the hope that it gives to people like me and would have given Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Frances, for sharing what was such a powerful story. It really does bring home the very real, urgent need for the kind of research that we're discussing tonight, and how it could transform life for so many people with Parkinson's and their families. Thank you. And thank you particularly for being so frank and open about the challenges that living with Parkinson's brings with it. Our final speaker is Emma Edwards, a Parkinson's nurse specialist. Parkinson's UK led the effort to establish and fund Parkinson's nurse specialist posts throughout the UK. The first specialist post Parkinson's nurse was appointed in 1989, and now there are more than 300 Parkinson's nurses across the UK. Meeting a Parkinson's nurse was the first person who really put some kind of framework around what having Parkinson's meant for me, and gave me some kind of feeling as to how to deal with it. They are absolute lifelines for people with Parkinson's, offering unbelievable support and care, as you'll hear from our next speaker. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce Emma Edwards.
Hello, my name's Emma Edwards and I'm one of the Parkinson's nurse specialists. I work in Plymouth for Livewell Southwest. My background is a mental health nurse. I qualified in 1997 and I trained at St Lawrence's Hospital. That's a lovely picture there of the front of that building. I've been a Parkinson's nurse for about 11 years now. I started in Cornwall in quite a rural area, and then a couple of years ago moved up to Plymouth City community, where I've worked since 2019 stop. I've got a caseload of about 410 patients who I share with another colleague. My background in mental health nursing is sort of held me in good stead. I'm very used to working with people with psychosis, and it's certainly something, it's certainly a symptom that we see in Parkinson's quite frequently. Sometimes the first time we'll hear that someone is experiencing psychosis is when they phone us on our telephone helpline, and it may be that there's something else going on. So we spend a lot of time with our patients, giving them education on what to look out for if things change, how to contact us. So often if somebody contacts us and something has changed really quickly, we'll go through this flow chart with them. So if they've rung us up and they've said that they're experiencing hallucinations, we'll go through to see, we'll ask some questions about whether they have an infection, have they had their bowels open recently. And I think anyone out there that's had a Parkinson's nurse will know that we're quite obsessed with your bowels, and for good reason. We'll also ask whether they've started new medications or whether they're taking their prescribed Parkinson's medication correctly, just to see if there's an underlying health condition which may be contributing to why they're having hallucinations. When I speak to people with Parkinson's who are experiencing psychosis, it can have a massive impact on their life. They're very often very frightened, worried and confused about why it's happening. I work with a chap who has been having hallucinations, but just mainly at night, which causes him to have a bad night's sleep, because he's so worried, which then impacts onto his wife, who has to reassure him that things are fine. I'm sure Francis will talk about this in greater depth, but we certainly know that it has an impact, a massive impact on the family. Those words there are just some of the things that I often hear from family members, that they're worried about what to say to their loved one who's experiencing psychosis. They feel very helpless at times. So how do we assess for it? So as a Parkinson's nurse, I will ask about whether people are experiencing psychosis every time I meet them. Every time I do a routine assessment, I will ask those questions as part of my top to toe assessment. I will often ask straight out, are you having hallucinations? Are you seeing things that no one else can see? And if they do say that they are, then we'll sort of concentrate a little bit more on that and find out what is happening. It's really important to double check understanding. I got caught out, even me, a Parkinson's nurse of 11 years and psychiatric nurse of 25 years. I got caught out. Lady I work with says that she was seeing spiders on the wall and no one else could see them. We all thought perhaps she was developing a psychosis here. It wasn't until she moved out during the lockdown to be with her daughter that we realised actually she had a spider infestation. So it would have been that information was really important to us later on, because we didn't treat her for psychosis in the end. It's really important to be empathetic when we're talking to the people that we work with when they say that they're having psychosis. It's really important to see that if we need to do anything about it. So I work with another chap who sees a black Labrador every now and again. It doesn't particularly worry him. He has insight into why he might see that. But I think we do need to do something when it starts to have more an impact on the day-to-day life of the person experiencing it, or if it starts to distress and frighten them. So one of the challenges, or many of the challenges that we have when we're working with people with psychosis, is how we best support them. We know, especially in the Southwest, there's limited mental health resources in these areas. And also the people in mental health don't always understand about psychosis in Parkinson's. There's most certainly at times a lack of joined up working amongst professionals. We tend to work in our specialist silos. Again, the Parkinson's drugs, as we've heard, can impact on psychosis. And so when we're looking at perhaps reducing Parkinson's drugs, it's a massive balancing act between the benefits of reducing that medication on psychosis to the effects it has on motor and non-motor symptoms. We also know there's a lack of other helpful drugs out there to help with Parkinson's psychosis. The NICE guidelines say about that we can use quetiapine or clozaril. Now, they come with their own side effects. And we also know that clozaril is not available in large parts of the country. And I know that. I work with Parkinson's UK. They rather brilliantly set up a working party to look at why clozaril wasn't being used in certain parts of the country. And we're just coming out with a little outcome of that project in the next few months. But certainly that's a massive barrier. We know as well that people that experience psychosis, as I've already alluded to, experience massive stress when this happens. And we also know that when this happens, because of the burden of care, it can, and the fact that it can lead to other things, can sometimes have an increased risk of admission to hospital or care homes. So what does improved care for people experiencing psychosis look like? For me, certainly, it's to make sure that we all ask the questions. So my colleagues and throughout the country ask for that when they're doing their regular assessments on people. Also, I think having joined up working with other professionals, as well as education, so that they're as informed as they can be, but also the response time to be quicker when somebody identifies that they're experiencing psychosis. I also wonder whether we should be explaining to people with Parkinson's that this symptom might occur. I'm not entirely sure what point we put that in, but I feel that more education is needed around that for people that have Parkinson's. I'm so pleased to hear that Parkinson's UK is funding research into this area, and I think that needs to continue across the board, not just with Parkinson's UK, but with other areas as well, because it is so vital. And I think ultimately, I would like to see better treatment. So I'm really excited to be part of this presentation tonight. I'm really excited that Parkinson's UK has funded this treatment or this research. So better treatments for me would certainly be medicines that are easily accessible, that have less side effects, and that perhaps could work hand in hand alongside established Parkinson's medications regimes. Okay, well, thank you very much. I will be in the panel afterwards if you've got any questions. Many thanks.
Thank you, Emma, for sharing your experience and your perspective, and also for what you do every day to improve life for people with Parkinson's, their families, and carers. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Those presentations were brilliant and I think brought to life both the trial, virtual biotech, and also the reality of living with Parkinson's. And Francis, in particular, I wanted to say thank you for a tremendously inspiring presentation. I met Francis for the first time last week, and 10 minutes with her was really uplifting, actually. We're going to go on to questions now, and it's time for the panel discussion. It's your opportunity to ask speakers anything you want. There's the Q&A function on the right-hand side of your screen, and you can ask a question. You just need to enter your name, first and last name, and that will get you access to the Q&A. There is a couple of questions in the chat box, and I've got one to start off. But before I did, there's one question that hasn't come up, which is, am I related to the Irish physician William O'Shaughnessy? And the answer is, as far as I'm aware, I'm definitely not related to them. But it was interesting to know that the O'Shaughnessy family get everywhere. But so I'm going to ask my first question. Francis, thank you again. I'm sure that there'll be lots of people in the audience who are going through a version of what you and Mark went through. And if you could ask give one piece of advice to people, what would it be?
Right. The one piece of advice would be attitude. You need to have a positive attitude. Otherwise, you become a victim, and everybody needs to be a survivor. I also think that you need to develop patience. I didn't have any, but believe me, by the time you've spent hours chasing an invisible cat out of your flat or picking up broken glass off the floor, which isn't there, you have quite a bit of patience. And the third thing is to be organized. Don't need any surprises when you're dealing with challenging situations. Don't want to run out of Stalevo or whatever drug it is. So don't be taken by surprise. Be organized, be patient, and above all, be positive, because Parkinson's UK is there for you and doing wonderful research. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Francis. Latha and Sanya, I don't know who would be best to answer this one, but we've had a couple of questions on whether you have enough people prepared to enter your studies at the moment, and have you got sufficiently diverse group of participants as well? So I think that one for you, please.
We do need participants. We started the study last week. We had a first participant screening last week, and one tomorrow, where we are going to see them in their own home. We are looking for people from any ethnicity, any gender, and age, as we said, 40 and above, as long as they can answer the questionnaire, which is mostly in English. So that's all. We want them to be fluent in English. But yes, we are looking for about 150 participants, 24 for the part 1 and about 120 for the part 2. So yes, please. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And actually, could I just follow that up with a question? You did mention COVID and the impacts it had. Perhaps you could just expand on how COVID has impacted you so far.
So we were ready to start last year, beginning of 2020, but for the COVID, we had to delay, and the lockdowns and the shielding, and also we needed to make changes to the protocol wherein we could see people in their own home, and which is now allowed by ethics and other approvals. So we can see them in clinic if they're willing to come. We had a patient and his wife come in last week, and they actually enjoyed it. They said it was like a day out after months. So, and then tomorrow's patient, of course, we have they would prefer, because of mobility issues, to come to their own home. So we are going in to see them in their place. So so we are more flexible now, and also we can do virtual assessments. So once we have the consent, then we can do the activities virtual as much as possible. So it will decrease the face-to-face activities. So we can do virtual, go into their own house and do the rest of the assessments, and which will decrease the time taken when we are with them. And of course, we will have our PPE. We are all vaccinated in the team, and we are making checks whether the participants in the family are vaccinated as well. And of course, we'll do the COVID checks, which we will on the day of assessments, whether they are still okay, and all the precautions when they come in, the PPE, personal protective equipments for us. They come in and make sure they're masked, we are masked, and other things. And similarly, when we go there, the distancing, and of course, we'll have the visor and things like that when the person who's doing closer physical examination bloods. The rest of us, when we just ask the questionnaires which needs face-to-face, we would be like the cognitive test where we have to draw and things like that. We'll be sitting a bit away. Yeah, so that's the COVID-related various strategies that we had to bring in. But as I said, it's now flexible and amenable so that we can continue. Even if we have more lockdowns, we should be able to continue with the study. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Sagnik, perhaps I could ask you, how quickly, assuming the endpoint goals are achieved, how quickly do you think treatment could arrive in the clinic?
Thank you for that. So that's a tricky one, I'll have to admit. The reason being that before a treatment is available in the clinic, we typically it needs to be licensed, and regulators, like in the UK, we have MHRA, which is the regulator involved in licensing of new treatments. So they will have certain requirements, and quite often that might be 2 positive trials. But while that is the case, we also know that if the results of this study were to be positive and kind of really convincingly positive, then we want to discuss with NHS England. For example, we know with cannabinoid medications, they have been involved in funding very, very large trials, for example, for epilepsy, for patients within the NHS. So we will also like to work with NHS England to see whether, and that's one quicker way of getting things into the clinic, even before licensing happens. So there may be strategies that we can kind of really think of.
Thank you very much for that. And can I just do a quick follow-up to Arthur? Perhaps Arthur, could you comment on how virtual biotech helps speed up the process of getting treatments to market?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. So in the virtual biotech program, we are concerned with not just doing a single study, but in the whole pathways I described, getting the drug to be approved. So for instance, when we look at a phase 2 trial, an early clinical trial, we're already looking for what is a path forward, what is a product going to be, how's it going to be available, how will it get approved. So it's that, I think, a difference in our approach now to what it was a few years ago is that we're looking for the entire solution, even though we're focused at the present on one piece, we want to be sure the whole path is there. So in fact, we've talked with Sagnik quite a bit about the question of exactly what form of cannabidiol could be available in the UK. There's still work to be done on that, but there's still time to do it. So we think we may have a big role, not only in this trial, but also in the next stage of making a cannabidiol form available for patients in the UK.
Thanks, Arthur. Emma, if I could come to you, we've got a question. You mentioned challenges. Do you think there are systemic changes that could be made to improve the life for people living with Parkinson's psychosis?
Yeah, I think there could, or can. I think one of them is better multidisciplinary team working, for sure. I mentioned in my presentation that often we work in our own sort of little units, and that can be challenging, I think, for people with Parkinson's who've got psychosis. Not only that the care can be fragmented, but they have to keep repeating the story of what's going on for them. So certainly, you know, I've worked in areas where the mental health team, for example, works very closely with the Parkinson's team, but I've also worked in other areas where the mental health team is completely depleted and really can't offer any timely services. In Plymouth, we're really lucky. We work with Dr. Camille Carroll, who actually did some research into cannabis and Parkinson's about 10 years ago and still has a special interest there. And we've got a really confident team that can help people with Parkinson's psychosis without having to always access mental health treatment. So yeah, I think working together, better education for professionals on this subject would be really helpful, and it certainly helps when we work together. Brilliant.
Thank you very much. And can I take the opportunity while I've got you on the screen to say thank you for the huge amount that you and your colleagues do, and how you manage with all the different, you know, pieces of information and what can be both cause and effect, and still demonstrate real confidence to the people with Parkinson's that you deal with. I think it's brilliant.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Sagnik, question, is psychosis a side effect of the drugs, particularly apomorphine, or is it caused by changes in the brain?
Thank you for that question. So, so we know that psychotic symptoms or psychosis is linked to increased dopamine levels in the brain. And because in people with Parkinson's, dopamine replacement is one of the key treatments. So it is often a side effect, but it is not often a side effect of these treatments that psychotic symptoms can present. But that is not the only reason. Independent of the effect of the dopamine replacement treatment, people can also have psychotic symptoms. And so we do not understand it very well fully to say what exactly causes psychotic symptoms in people with Parkinson's. Yes, treatments play a role, but independent of that, there may be some other abnormalities that may be going on. And we are also kind of, as part of this study, I just wanted to plug on something, is that we are also trying to understand whether CBD might be having an effect on some of those other mechanisms of through which people with Parkinson's may be experiencing psychotic symptoms.
Thank you very much. Actually, can I ask, I did ask a question about whether you need trial participants. One question's just come up from our Scotland trustee, David Allen. Do participants need to be in England?
No, they do not. So right now we have expressed interest from England, but CRN, the Clinical Research Network, has been helping us to find different sites. So we can go out to Wales and Scotland if they are interested. So we just have to make some amendments to the ethics, and that should be fine, and we can get approvals to go ahead in other parts of the UK as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
That would be very interesting. Thank you for the interest. That would be really great. Yeah.
Arthur, what proportion of the 145,000 people with Parkinson's in the UK suffer from psychosis, roughly? We got enough?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, well, I think there's two ways I think about this question. One is, of those approximately 145,000 people, how many today are experiencing psychosis? But the other way to look at it is how many will experience psychosis at some stage of their Parkinson's. So the answer to the first is a minority. It may be, depending on how you count it, I think people talk about 40%, something in that range. The number who will experience it by usually in the later stages of Parkinson's is greater, 75, 80%. Cynic and Latha may have other numbers, but it's high at the later stages for sure.
Is there anything you'd like to add, Sagnik or Latha?
No, I think I think what Arthur said is spot on, and kind of at any given day, if you count, it will be kind of in that range, as Arthur said, 40% or 40, 50, 60% of people might be experiencing psychotic symptoms. But in the longer term, it is kind of everyone might experience kind of, if one lives long enough as the disease progresses, it is likely that kind of close to 100% might go on to experience psychotic symptoms. So it is really quite prevalent if we follow people up for a long period of time.
Yeah.
Thank you. This next question, I think, is a really interesting question, and I'm not sure who the best person to answer it is, but what are the relevant or relative strengths between high street CBD and trial CBD?
Yeah.
Sagnik, maybe. Sagnik?
Yeah, perhaps I'll come on, respond to that. So just to give a sense, in this particular trial, in the earlier stage of this trial, when we are trying to find out the right dose of CBD, we are starting with 200 milligrams per day of CBD. And we plan to study up to 1,000 milligrams per day of CBD. And we are hoping to find somewhere around 600 to 800 milligrams per day, or even 1,000 milligrams per day might be the right dose that might be useful. So while that is the case with regard to what we are planning to do, if you now look at CBD in various forms, that is either available online or in some of the stores on the high street, they will typically have a few milligrams, really around kind of 10, 15, 20 milligram in an entire bottle, where people may be asked to take several drops every day. So in essence, one might be getting only a few milligrams of CBD from those that are available on the street. So it's really a several orders of magnitude if you think of the dose that might work and the dose that might be present in the high street CBD, which people might be spending a fortune to buy.
So completely different, really. Thank you very much. Emma, are severe panic attacks common in Parkinson's, including difficulty completing inhalation?
Okay, good question. From my experience, oh, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we can.
From my experience, anxiety in Parkinson's is really common, and part of that can be panic attacks. Severe panic attacks, maybe not so much that I've come across, and certainly when someone is feeling very nervous or very worried, they're worried about their breathing. So that can perhaps be where the difficulty sort of taking a breath comes from. And certainly it's another thing that we ask for when we are assessing you in clinic or in a home visit. And there's things that can be done as well to sort of help with anxiety. So there's different medicines that we can use, or different techniques like mindfulness is really, really helpful. Or even sort of other talking therapies. So to answer the question, I think severe panic attacks, in my experience, perhaps not so common. Anxiety issues, very common.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure who's best to answer this one, but are there any particular risks to taking part in this study?
Perhaps I will kind of come on that, and then maybe if Lata wants to add. So I think the key thing to remember is that we have a huge amount of information about the safety of CBD, not necessarily in people with Parkinson's psychosis, but people across different age ranges. So from lots of studies in epilepsy, lots of various clinical trials in different medical conditions. So we know that CBD is very safe, especially in people of the age range who will typically present with Parkinson's psychosis. So we know it is safe. What we don't know is how well it might work. So that's what one of the things that we want to test. We also know that CBD is very unlikely to have any kind of meaningful interactions when given with other treatments that are given to people with Parkinson's psychosis. So we know, because based on other studies, what we do not know is how it happens in real life. That's why we are doing this study. But we know very well that CBD is likely to be very, very safe. There are no real risks, health risks associated with this trial. So that's kind of before we start the study. But when somebody is in the study, we will regularly assess them. We will remain in contact with them throughout the study over telephone. They will have a kind of 24-hour contact number, just in case anything were to happen. And it could be something completely unrelated to CBD, but just a kind of, for example, which can happen, that one might trip and have a fall. And one might want to get information as to whether it is safe to continue with the CBD. So there will be always a doctor on the other end of the phone line to give advice. So if there are any issues, we are always at hand to help, to inform, and to provide the right advice.
Thank you very much.
Just to,
Sorry, go ahead, Lata.
Yeah, just to add, the rest of the study, as I said, it's like routine examinations when you go to see your specialist or neurologist or PD nurse. So it's physical examination, the routine Parkinson's related questionnaires, which you're familiar with, and then blood test where we take in the routine bloods, which is just like 5 to 10 ml in total, ECG. So these are routines that you're used to anyway, so there's no risk there. And MRI scan, people who are interested, willing, and who are eligible would be taking part in the MRI sub-study. And again, most of the participants would have gone through DAT scan and other scan or MRI scan, so they're familiar with that. So there is no real risk there as well. So just to add that there are, taking part in the study doesn't require any other, it's not very different from your routine clinical care. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Arthur, I'm going to ask you kind of 3 questions in one, if that's okay. We've had a question about from someone saying, I don't suffer from Parkinson's, but my father and brother had Parkinson's. Is there anything that can help with them research into genetic trials? There's a second question about the length of time it takes from the start of original trials to when solutions come to market. And then the third question is, how is virtual biotech progressing 3 years on? And are we where you thought we'd be by now, ahead or behind? So if you could answer those 3, brilliant. I think you're on mute, Arthur.
Thanks, Gary. Yes, first question about genetic studies. The best place to find out about studies is the Take Part Hub. The one that comes to mind for me right now, just off the top of my head, is one at University College London, where they're looking for families that have 1 or more people with Parkinson's, like you described, perfectly suited to that. And those individuals will be asked to give DNA for a full sequencing analysis. So that's one that comes to mind immediately. But look on the Take Part Hub. You can also email research@Parkinson's UK, and there may be individual trials that are not on the top of my head right now that people can tell you about. So yeah, genetic studies are very important. A lot of great clues come out of that for new treatments. The length of time, the question I see asked specifically what if it often takes 10 to 20 years, what can be done in the shorter term? Great question. Yes, we do look at studies of that sort. One great example is our so-called Top Hat study. I mentioned it briefly in the recorded remarks. This is on Dancitron, a drug that's already in use, a small molecule. It's generic, it's inexpensive. It's believed it may be effective at treating hallucinations, so an early stage of this sort of mental aspect of Parkinson's we heard about in more detail today. That drug is in the pharmacies now. It's just that no one really understands whether that's going to help treat hallucinations in Parkinson's. So in funding that trial, that's a very potentially a very short timeline to impact. We already had discussions with the MHRA, the regulatory authority, before starting that trial to be sure the design of that trial and the answers we're going to get in that trial will be enough to allow them to make a clear recommendation that it should be used. So the NHS and can allow it, and doctors and patients can use it. So that kind of repurposing trial is the best way to find a treatment that can address symptoms in the short term, as you're asking your question. The limitation of that is there's a limited number of drugs that can be repurposed, and maybe there are aspects of Parkinson's which will not be addressed by an existing drug. And that's why we have to have a combination of those repurposing trials and trials that try to develop completely new medications to deal with completely unaddressed part of Parkinson's. So we think both are necessary. We have to start the difficult ones now so that in 10 or 20 years, people aren't still saying there's nothing. So last question was, Gary.
Virtual biotech, how is it 3 years in?
Yes, thanks. Honestly, it's doing better than I had hoped when we started. The pipeline of projects we have, the quality of projects, the team we have, it's a small team, but it's really working well. And even more exciting, honestly, is the range of opportunities we're looking at now that we could potentially fund this year and next year. In addition to GDNF, some other really exciting projects. So I think we really have built, for you, for the Parkinson's community, with your input, a really great portfolio of projects, and they are going to bring exciting results. Some maybe in a few years, some longer. So yeah, I think we're doing extremely well.
Thank you very much, Arthur. Francis, I think it's a really important question because quite often gets overlooked. But how do you think a new drug will impact families caring for people with Parkinson's, and that in the broader sense, not just psychosis, but how do you see this from a family's perspective?
I think any new drug that's introduced would give families an enormous amount of hope. They'd be terribly excited that there was something that could help their loved one, and it would reduce an enormous amount of stress that goes on when you're coping on a day-to-day basis with the challenges of Parkinson's. So yes, I would be absolutely thrilled if something had come along for Mark, and I'm sure that any family coping with Parkinson's would be delighted. Maybe we would need a bit of guidance as to what would be the expectations of the new drug, clear communication, and I'm sure Emma will back me up that some of the people caring for patients with Parkinson's aren't the brightest, but they do need quite a bit of help as to what the gradual changes would be, and obviously done with great care, because when medication levels are not quite right, we have lots of other things to deal with, but couldn't be more excited. Absolutely, it would be wonderful for all families.
Thank you very much. And I have one final question to the whole panel, and I have to say, as someone who has Parkinson's, I think this is a really important question. Are patients who suffer from psychosis aware of it? I don't know who wants to answer that question.
Shall I start first? Would that be
yes,
okay?
Please.
I think insight can fluctuate. So maybe when people start to have those illusions, which was mentioned in the presentation, perhaps people think, oh, that's a little bit odd, that's a little bit strange, and might just sort of seek a little bit of clarification. But often when I ask people about do they see things that no one else can see, they'll often, you know, I've heard this so many times that they think their house is haunted because they can see things and no one else can see them. With some education, we can help them gain some insight into why it might be happening. But later on in the progression of the condition, sometimes that insight can go and they need a lot of reassurance from their families, from professionals. Yeah, so I think insight can fluctuate. And Francis, do you think with your husband, did he believe you when you kind of reassured him?
He did up to a point, but he would at certain times, particularly 3 o'clock in the morning, be absolutely adamant that I'd left lots of rusty saucepans and things like that in his bed, and he couldn't understand why. He was convinced of this, but you know, at 3 o'clock in the morning, you just sort of get on and say, "Oh, I've taken them out of the bed now, Mark. You'll be able to go back to sleep." So there was a belief that he was absolutely right and I was wrong, and so I just dealt with it on the cuff, Emma, as we went along. So that it got worse towards the end because you couldn't sort of get him back to reality at all.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, guys. I think we've probably come to the end of the time that we've got. I have to say thank you so much for the questions that we've received from everyone, as well as the great answers. And Emma, thank you for not dwelling on bowel movements for too long in your answers this evening. That's personally much appreciated.
I can come back and talk about that.
But this has been, I think, really powerful, and we've covered such a lot of ground. Thank you, everyone, for being here this evening. I hope you, like me, come away, I think, inspired and hopeful, actually. And I believe that the combination of individually game-changing research programs with virtual biotech approach has the potential to deliver real benefits to people with Parkinson's, but particularly in the near term. And that's, for me, is crucial. Tonight, you've heard about the world's first large-scale trial of CBD. The virtual biotech approach gives real hope of life-changing results, whether it's in this project or in a number of others that Arthur mentioned. And you can see the significant commitments, both financially and in terms of capability. And I think really importantly, at the heart of all of this is the people with Parkinson's and those who look after them and care for them and support them in driving the agenda that we have for our research program. And importantly, in doing so, we're not doing so alone. We're doing so with the Parkinson's community, with partners like Emma and Francis, and expertise like Sagnix and Lathers, and the real strength of intent and commitment from all of the community. And we need you to continue to stand alongside us. And whether that's taking part in trials, whether that's volunteering, whether that's fundraising, whether that's being part of your local group, if you've been inspired, we'd like to hear from you, and we'd like to hear how you can get more involved. And you can see the guys are still looking for participants in the CBD trial as well. I'd like to say thank you to John Amphlett and family for supporting us in hosting this evening's sessions. And this is a new style for us in a virtual world as well. I'd particularly like to say thank you to John as well for his leadership of the Kensington and Chelsea group over the last 10 years and the support over a considerable period of time. Thank you, John. Thank you to Dr. Bhattacharya and Dr. Valajuan, and good luck with the program. And thank you so much for bringing it to life for us this evening. Thank you, Arthur, for your vision, and the team for your vision, your commitment, and the delivery, and the potential, frankly. I also want to say thank you to Catherine, Sophie, and all the team in the background who've brought together this evening and made it work so seamlessly. And thank you all on the line tonight for your support. Parkinson's UK's ambitions would not be realisable without you. And it's all about us as a group, as a team, delivering and moving forward to a point where we can find that cure for Parkinson's. And I wish you a good evening, and I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you very much.